How many people tuned in for the Super Bowl this month? If you did, it's likely you didn't just see the worst holding call of all time, but you also saw something even more unexpected. Two commercials about Jesus. Now, you might be wondering, what was that all about? Well, a year ago, a group of people realized that Jesus of Nazareth, who demonstrated God's love for the world 2,000 years ago, has now somehow become synonymous with hate, bigotry, and political power, and they wanted to be a part of setting the record straight. And so we had Jesus at the Super Bowl. Conversations have started again about what he was about and who he was, and naturally, in this day and age, these commercials have led to a lot of criticism on Twitter, Reddit, Fox News, CNN, or every other place people frequent online. Some feel these commercials are heretical, woke, and don't represent the true Jesus. Others have labeled the He Gets Us movement as hate speech because of some of its donors, or fiscally irresponsible because of the cost of getting an ad spot at the Super Bowl. But here's the reality. There's an enemy, according to Scripture, who is fine with us living our normal lives, even showing up to worship God here on Sundays. But once we start to get serious about having conversations about who Jesus is with people who haven't embraced faith in their life yet, well, that's going to get opposed every single time. And so we want to move past all these responses to take hold of the opportunity we have to begin this important conversation. Now, the ads aren't designed to be a complete sermon or explanation of an entire theology. They are not meant to support one political agenda over another, but a kingdom agenda. And nor is the campaign hate speech or out to target a certain group of people. And yes, there may be questions about finances, and I'm not a financial person, but we need to think a little more critically about this than just immediately turning to hot takes. Because here at RVCC, we want to model thoughtfulness, leverage this cultural moment, navigate the ambiguity with charity, and amplify a respectful dialogue about what matters most, because we desire to share about the love of God that has been made real to us in the person and work of Jesus. And we believe Jesus is someone who truly gets us, all of us, and we need to make the main thing the main thing. So with that said, what does it mean to be us, to be human? Well, Eugene Peterson put it best when he said this: to be human is to be in trouble. At least one of these three options is true for every single person here online. You are someone who has known trouble, you are someone going through trouble, or if you think life is perfect, don't worry, trouble will find you. Whether it's financial, medical, relational, vocational, spiritual, mental, or generational, the one fact in life is that no matter who you are, trouble is inevitable and the struggle is real. My wife Jill and I learned this early on in our marriage. Having tied the knot in our early 20s, we were convinced that we were at the prime of our lives. We expected to have all the opportunities in the world to live where we wanted, build a family together, and spend the first decade of our marriage checking off all the things normal couples usually get done. And then in year 2, we found out that Jill had a chronic condition. It took 6 years and 4 different hospitals just to finally find a team of doctors who might have a solution. And if you know anything about healthcare in the US, you know the rules are written in Parseltongue, the price of care is outrageous, and for some reason, people decided that the holiday season was the most wonderful time of the year to gamble on how sick you think you're going to get the following year. I could go on a rant about this, but let me tell you, navigating all that was stressful, frustrating, sometimes funny, often depressing. If you have struggled with health, you get this. And if you haven't, I'm sure you know the struggles we have yet to face. So the pressing question for our lives is not, do we have struggles, because we all got them? Rather, where or who can we turn to when the struggle is real? And how can we have a life of abundance and flourishing in a world filled with trouble? The answer to that question is a person, a Galilean carpenter who lived in the early 1st century named Jesus. And what set this man apart from everyone before him and everyone after him was that he was truly human, but also truly God. What do you imagine when you hear the word God? Maybe you imagine an angry man who lives somewhere up in the clouds. Maybe it's a dude with a white beard wearing a white robe who acts like a cosmic vending machine. For some, he might be a divine Republican or a holy Democrat. For others, a Santa Claus for adults who can't cope with life. Some might think God is an outdated, fictional, and toxic concept that makes the world a far worse place. And some imagine God, whoever he is uninterested and uninvolved in our lives. But then there's this crazy, improbable, and too good to be true claim about God that the church has been making for over 2,000 years, and it's this. The clearest picture of who God is can be seen in Jesus, a real flesh and blood person who walked the roads of Judea for about 30 years. And that claim sounded just as insane back then as it does now. So much so that during the first 400 years of the church, people were like, hold up, are we sure we want to say that? What if Jesus was a special divine being that was created by God, but not actually God? Well, what if Jesus was a normal human being that God adopted as his own and used in a powerful way? What if Jesus' life, death, and resurrection was just an illusion God created to relate with us because there is no way God would stoop down that low? What if the humanness of Jesus was real and physical, but only on the outside, but mentally and emotionally, he was totally God? And these are just 4 examples. There were other alternative explanations that groups of people threw out there for who Jesus was because it was too wild and nonsensical for them to say that Jesus equaled God. But every single time people question that equation, the church has consistently and boldly said, you're right, it doesn't make sense, but we believe the historical Jesus was homoousios with God, of the same essence as God. That means Jesus is not just 100% human, but also 100% God, and there is no difference. Because even if it defies logic, even if we can't figure out in words exactly how that can happen, even if it's unthinkable that God would get down on our level, we're going to maintain the paradox and the mystery because that's the only way that we, the church, can say he gets us. Because he was really one of us. Jesus lived the human life, and instead of avoiding the troubles we go through, Jesus chose the struggle. Let me tell you how. When Jesus was born, his parents were required to make a sacrifice in the temple according to Jewish law. It says this in Luke chapter 2, verses 23 to 24. When the people came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. What's easy to overlook here if you're unfamiliar with Jewish law is that according to Leviticus 12:8, a pair of doves or pigeons was only acceptable if a family could not afford a lamb, meaning Jesus wasn't born in a well-to-do family, but one that knew the challenge of making ends meet. 2 years later, Jesus and his family had to seek asylum in Egypt due to King Herod's insane policy to kill all the boys in Bethlehem in its vicinity who were 2 years old and younger, because he was afraid of people who could challenge his place on the throne. Jesus felt the weight of political oppression and the struggle of life as a refugee. And when it was safe for Jesus' family to return home, Jesus' dad, Joseph, took up work as a carpenter. Jesus and his brothers would have been heavily involved in the family business since, traditionally speaking, children took on the trade of their parents. That means Jesus was a blue-collar worker who commuted long distances and knew back-breaking labor that didn't pay all that much. By Jesus' 30th birthday, there's reason to believe that his dad Joseph dies due to his complete absence in the Gospels. Jesus had to wrestle through the grief of losing a parent too soon, while also figuring out how to step into a bigger role in supporting the family. And then during his ministry, Jesus had to rely on the financial support of people who followed his teachings. And as an itinerant teacher, he didn't have a permanent address to call home and knew what it was like to rely on the kindness of others for a place to sleep and a meal to eat. The point I'm trying to make here is this. Jesus chose the struggle, and he knew the struggle, which means God did not leave us alone when we go through hard times. Full disclosure here, when I'm looking to move into a neighborhood, I'll admit that I'm looking for comfort. I'm looking for convenience and safety and opportunity and the least amount of trouble. And when I think about my priorities, I thank God that I'm not God. Because if I was Jesus, I would have avoided suffering. Jesus would have never chosen the nicer zip codes. Jesus would have Kevin Duranted his way to the hardest road. But instead, because I'm not God, Jesus came and threw himself into the middle of our struggles. He touched the broken. He suffered hunger, rejection, and pain. But here's the other thing that the Bible tells us. Jesus suffered pain like we will never, ever face. He was despised and rejected by humans. He was a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised and we held him in low esteem, according to Isaiah. Jesus knows our struggle and then some. He took the weight of the sin of humanity for us. The gospel tells us that Jesus not only gets our struggles, but he died to set us free from the worst we would ever face. Someone said life is about 10% what happens to you and 90% how we respond to what happens. Here's the difference Jesus makes in a world of struggle. Knowing Jesus doesn't change the fact that we will struggle in this life, but it changes how we respond to what we suffer in this life. In Psalm 13, King David cries out to God, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" Here David is struggling. He doesn't ignore it or hide it, and he isn't afraid to admit he feels forgotten. Elsewhere in the Psalms, David describes this feeling as being in the depths, of sinking to the lowest point possible. He prays out of the depths, "I cry to you, Lord." Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. And it's likely that David, living in Jerusalem at the time when he wrote this, when he said the depths, he was probably thinking about the Dead Sea, which was just east of him and located below Jerusalem. And in fact, if you didn't know this about the Dead Sea, it's about 1,412 feet below sea level, making it the lowest body of water on earth. But if you've been lucky enough to go visit the Dead Sea, then you know about its high salinity, and because the human body is lighter than the density of the salt and minerals in the water, if you go into the Dead Sea, guess what? Even if you aren't Katie Ledecky, you will float. Even in the depths, even in the lowest point when David feels like he is surrounded by water and has no solid ground to stand on, and life is falling apart and the struggles are real, David can still say, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation." Why? Because even in the depths, David knows by the grace of God, he is going to float. And so he can be honest with God about his struggles. He knows God cares for him in the middle of them. He can trust that even if he can't stand, God's going to keep him floating on the waters. But unlike David, we can also say with confidence that God took a plunge into the Dead Sea with us and chose to struggle alongside us because Jesus also struggled. And even though Jesus won't take us out of our trouble immediately, he came to show us how to flourish despite them and how to live right now in the hope and anticipation of a better tomorrow that God is ushering in. So remember when you struggle, when you find yourself at the lowest point in the depths, that there is a God who gets your pain, who has stepped into the human situation, who has experienced not just the best of life, but the worst that it has to offer, and who promises that the struggle may be real, but it won't last forever, and his name is Jesus. If you don't know him, if you still have questions about him, here's a few ways to get acquainted with him. Number one, go to the Apple App Store or Google Play and download the YouVersion Bible app. Once you're there, click Plans and search the He Gets Us Reading plan for an introduction to who this Jesus is. Number two, if you're curious to learn more about the He Gets Us movement, check out their website on hegetsus.com for articles, videos, and other resources. Also, stay tuned with RVCC over the next 5 weeks as we continue to talk about who Jesus is. And finally, number three, if you're a follower of Jesus and want to learn more about who he was, what he did, and why he matters, go check out N.T. Wright's Simply Jesus. It's available on Amazon. You can borrow it on Libby or Overdrive, and there's an audiobook edition as well. And if all else fails, I will lend it to the first person who asks for a copy. So look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a wonderful day, and we will be talking Jesus and heartbreak next time we're here together.